All right. First off, I want to thank Ivano for inviting me to do this. And I want to thank all of you guys because I think you're all absolutely out of your minds. And the reason for that is because Abuna David is giving a talk literally right there. So I think this is like the equivalent of like going to a little league baseball game when the Dodgers are like playing like 5 feet away. So you're all crazy. I think you're all out of your minds, but I'm grateful for it. So without further ado, I want to ask you guys a question. Who here knows Jim Jones? Samir, of course, Samir would know Jim Jones, of course, yeah. So Jim Jones, I'm probably going to scare half of you guys away when I start to talk like this. It's very like Exodus fashion. Jim Jones was basically a cult leader. He took all his followers to some like deserted area, had them drink a bunch of Kool-Aid, killed themselves. Tonight, I'm going to be making a similar request. I'm going to have you guys, or ask of you guys, to kill yourselves. Now, before you run out, we have to ask yourselves, what is a self? Kusha, is your self the person that came in here tonight? Is it the subject I that does all these different things? You go to work, you go to the store, you literally just exist inside the valley. But even inside the valley, are you just a self? I think that we think of the self as a singular thing. We think of the self as something that's just given to us. It's not something that we work for. It's something that we wake up with the moment we're born. But Thomas Merton, a 20th century Catholic monk, said, in order to become myself, I must cease to be what I always thought I wanted to be. And in order to find myself, I must go out of myself. And in order to live, I have to die. It's a very interesting statements to be making about oneself. Become myself. Find myself. How does one become something that they already have? How do they find something that's always there? What is the self? Well, the early Christians thought of the self as existing in two ways. You have the prelapsarian self. This is the self that exists before the fall. This is the self that is described in Genesis 1:26 when we're told that we as human beings are made in the image of God. But we also have a corrupted self. This is the self that exists because of the fall. This is the self that falls into temptation. This is the self who is marked by immutability or mutability, sorry. This is the self that is characterized by change, inconsistency. And this is the self that the world wants to target when it tries to get you to sin. The journey of the Christian life is to get back to the true self, the self that does not change, the self that is in sync with God's will in our lives. The fallen self is not necessary. It's not a necessary part of our nature. And to kind of elaborate and flesh out what I mean by that, suppose you go to an animal shelter and you ask, I want a dog. And they say, well, do you want a white dog, a black dog? And a white dog. But I'll tell you what they're not going to say. They're not going to say, would you like a dog that's a mammal? Or would you like a dog that's an amphibian? Would you like a dog that's a reptile? Because you know what? Those don't exist. They're all mammals. Spoiler alert. Likewise, we are all made in the image of God. It's non-negotiable. That is a necessary part of what we are as people. But it is not necessary that we're sinful beings. Eventually, we're going to get back to our prelapsarian selves, God willing. And that's the goal. So why does all this matter? It matters because this prelapsarian self is the self that has a pure heart. And that is the subject of this talk, if you did not see the title slide that I just kind of brushed past. So what is a pure heart? The word purity comes from the Greek word katharos, which means clean. It's marked by unity, singleness. It's not filled with multiplicity. It's not easily distracted. It's one thing. The 19th century theologian Soren Kierkegaard said that purity of heart is to will one thing, the will of God. An example that I could use to flesh this out. Have any of y'all ever been kayaking? Yeah, thought so. Most of you guys. If you haven't, then why are you living in California? You go last time I went kayaking, I was kayaking with somebody. I was in the back. And we were in sync at first, I was doing like the 1-1, that left right motion. And they were with me. And then I hit them with that left right. They couldn't keep up. But eventually I think we figured it out. But in that moment, I'm like, why are we not in sync? I was getting so upset. I'm like, why can't you just know that I'm about to double it up? Like, I mean, how are they supposed to know? But I'm in the back, like, expect them to be turning around the whole time. But this is kind of like how we are with God. We're not in sync with God all the time. Sometimes God's will and our will run into conflict with each other. In order to have a pure heart, our will needs to be in sync with God. St. Isaac the Syrian says, whoever does not subject his will to God becomes a slave to his foe. Guys, I think that we need to be intentional about how we live our lives. We live in a culture that pushes an agenda that is very different than the one that is written in Scripture. We live in a culture that normalizes things that we all know to be sin. And sometimes we don't even recognize them as sin. We don't recognize them as being contrary to God's will because they're so normalized that if you don't know the word, you're not going to know that these things are not what God wants for you. I mean, think about when Adam and Eve fell in the garden. How did the serpent tempt them? So did God really say that? And then think about when Christ was tempted in the wilderness. What did he say? Every time he's like, it is written, it is written, it is written. Because he knew the will of God. So he kind of had a cheat code because he is God, but we have that book. There's no reason why we can't know the will of God. We pray, we read scripture, we inform ourselves, and we direct our lives accordingly. Romans 12:2, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you may discern what is the will of God. It's interesting, right? I'm giving a talk on the purity of heart, and here we are talking about the mind. But if you turn to the early writings from the Christians, the church fathers, desert fathers, they often use terms like emotion and thought interchangeably. Now, the way I think about it is we're probably not talking about the organ known as the heart when it writes about purity of heart. We're probably thinking about something more akin to emotions. And the heart is the seat of emotions, as we come to think of it. Evagrius, one of the early desert fathers, actually used emotions and thoughts interchangeably. They're closely connected. You can't really separate them in the way that we understand the heart. One of the primary goals of the monastics was to control their attention. By being able to be in control of their attention, they were able to direct that attention to contemplation of God. Attention is a faculty of the mind. So on the topic of mind, here's a quote from John Cassian. He said, the mind of the righteous man, then, must not be like wax or some other soft material. which always gets its form and shape from the mark that is stamped on it, and that remains there until it receives the impression of another mark. Thus, it never keeps its own character and always takes on the form of whatever is stamped on it. On the contrary, our mind must be like a kind of adamant seal, so that it always retains its own character, inviolable, and shapes and transforms whatever happens to it into its own likeness without, however, being stamped itself by the things that happen to it. I know some of us, probably myself included, are going to be in this talk deeply connected to what is happening, thinking about, oh, pure heart, yeah, nice, praise God. And then we're going to leave, and we're going to be met with impressions that take us out of the character that we think is who we are supposed to be. Admittedly, one of my biggest blind spots in my faith is I really love Lil Durk, and I can't stop listening to Lil Durk. I am 4 months clean on Lil Durk, but when I listen to Lil Durk, I think, yeah, it's okay. I can manage this, and I can manage my Christianity. That's not a problem, except it is. Because everything that is being told, everything that I'm inputting is about pride, it's about lust, it's about violence. And all of those things maybe slowly but surely shape how I think. If I'm inputting Lil Durk, how can I expect to output Jesus Christ? As Christians, we need to strive for a good heart, a good mind, a good self. The self is stable, immutable, focused. Whereas a bad heart, a bad mind, a bad self is unstable, mutable, easily distracted by Lil Durk. Okay. To get from a bad heart, bad mind to a good heart and a good mind, we need some sense of what that good mind is. The social psychologists Hazel Marcus and Paulinarius have this theory. And this theory is called the possible selves theory. Essentially, what they're saying is we have some idea of who we want to become, who we might become, and who we're afraid of becoming. And we evaluate our current selves in reference to our ideal selves. So, for instance, if I want to be a lawyer, I'm going to evaluate myself in reference to that ideal. So what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to take the LSAT. I'm going to go into law school. I'm going to get good grades in my classes. I know some of you guys, med school people, listen, these two guys right here, not to call anybody out, Jonathan and Andrew, never shut up about the MCAT. I'm like, bro, I do not care about the MCAT. It does not matter to me. I have no interest. Would you please stop talking about it? These guys never shut up. Not to call out Jonathan, he needs to be told, but not to call out Andrew. But if we had as much obsession with the self that is marked by unity with God as we do with the MCAT self, wow, this room would be, well, it would be the Christian Hall of Fame. Because I know probably 95% of you guys are all medical people. So we have to ask ourselves, in what way are we getting distracted? And what areas of my life am I separating from God's will? We need to evaluate these areas in reference to the person that Christ wants us to be. The same way that we reference ourselves towards being a doctor, being a lawyer, being an engineer, all that Egyptian stuff. We need to do that same thing with our life with Christ. And we do that by guarding our heart. Proverbs 4:23, one of my favorite verses. I have a necklace, and because that just wasn't enough for me, I also got it tattooed on my chest, but I'm not going to take my shirt off. Sorry, guys. Says, above all else, guard your heart, for the energy of everything you do flows from it. What does it mean to be a good guard? A good guard does not let the enemy in. Sylvia, say you're Cleopatra and you got a bunch of enemies coming in, and I'm standing out front and I'm just knocked out, you know. I'm not a very good guard, am I? The bad guy just got in. Well, guess what? The bad guy for me is Lil Durk. Who is that for you? Thomas Merton said, keep your eyes clean, your ears quiet, and your mind serene. Breathe God's air. Work, if you can, under his sky. It's all about what we give our attention to. It's that simple. You want a pure heart? Don't give your attention to impure things. You're letting in the bad guy. This is the whole focus of monastic life. That's why they separate themselves from the world. I'm not saying that we need to go live off in the middle of nowhere. I'm not saying that we need to hate people. It's not about that. When you separate yourself from these things, you learn to love them more, because you learn to love them through the lens of Christ-like love. There's a book I read recently by someone named Inbar Graver. She's I don't know what she is, but she balances a lot of different things. So she uses psychology to look at history, and she looks at the history of the Desert Fathers. And she points to time and time again in the lives of the Desert Fathers, they obsess over their thoughts, how their thoughts are getting to them, how their thoughts are being imposed on them by the devil, by the demons. They say things like, what am I to do? For my thoughts are afflicting me. My thoughts wander about and I am inflicted. Can a man keep all his thoughts in control and not surrender one to the enemy? What is this obsession with thoughts? Why, if it's so simple to reconcile our thoughts and our actions, why, if we can input bad things and think about all these bad things that are in our popular culture, then why are the monks, of all people, so obsessed with their thoughts? We have that same struggle. Now, we have to be careful. I say consult your spiritual father, because, we can't perfectly replicate all the monastic wisdom. They're monks. We're in the world. Not everything is meant to be taken as literal advice of how to live our lives. But a lot of it is very similar. We have the same struggles. Everything is so accessible. If you drive down Hollywood Boulevard, what do you see? You see a bunch of billboards of naked women. But look, social media, the internet, everything is right at our fingertips. I would hate to be a kid growing up in the world today. The moral of the story that I'm not going to tell is that we're going to die. One day we're going to breathe our last breath. And I don't even know if I wrote that right. It might not even be Sherman's. I think it's like something else, but it's whatever, It's Ivano's fault. He's the one that had me come up here. I'm not the one. But more of the story that I'm trying to tell is that we're all going to breathe our last breath. When I'm breathing my last breath, I'm not going to be thinking about Lil Durk. None of that matters. What matters is what we do here and now in this life. And we need to focus on our long-term goals. And sometimes that means sacrificing short-term pleasure. So how do we get a purity of heart? We get it by guarding our heart. But what are we guarding it from? The first thing I'm going to be talking about is pride. That's one of the things that gets in the way. Pride is an inflated sense of self-worth. It's what happens when we kick God out from the equation, when we think, I can do this myself. It's easy when we're kids, we're always dependent on somebody. You want to go somewhere, you have to have your parent drive you. You have to go to the doctor, your parent will take you. You got to be fed, your parent will feed you, God willing. But when we become adults, we start doing things. We learn how to drive. We learn how to buy an apartment. We learn how to feed ourselves. And some of us, and if you're one of them, meet me after the class because I need your help, learn how to do their taxes. So we get to a point where we start to think that we know how to do things. We stop thinking about God so much. And it's fine. It's like whatever. It just kind of gets pushed to the side a little bit. But what's really happening is, say you have a coffee cup and it's sitting right here. Can I borrow somebody's mug? Mug sitting right here. Okay. What happens if I take this away? I promise I won't do anything. It's like really scared right now. I can see the fear in his eyes. If I take this away, what happens? It falls down, right? Hey, you guys are smart. You should know this stuff. Falls down. Now, what happens if you take the floor away? This all falls down. What happens if you take the earth under the floor away? I'm getting lost in what I'm talking about. It all falls down. God is the ground of everything. We're like this. God keeps us in existence. If God goes away, we all go away. So we have to be aware of that. We're dependent on God, not the other way around. God is not some concept. God is not culture. God is not some construct that helps us understand life. We're dependent on God at all times, even if we feel it or not. And the moment that we start to, get a little comfortable, that's when things get crazy. I hope that you guys don't have to get to that point where you're so far from God that you're suffering to that degree. My life before I found God was marked by anxiety, marked by crime, doing things very appalling, some of which I could tell you guys, shout out to the statute of limitations, but I won't, because y'all don't need to know that. St. Moses the Strong is like the perfect example of this. I know you guys all know who that is for the most part. My favorite Coptic saint. The man lived in his master's house and gets kicked out. It's like, I got this. He goes out on the street, he starts stealing things. He's running around stealing stuff. And guys, the problem with this way of life is that it's always a fearful way of living. It's always a constant, who's behind me? But this way of living, where you're constantly having to keep your head on a swivel, where you're constantly having to watch everyone around you, because one little mistake could cost you your life, it's nowhere to live. And St. Moses the Strong, he recognized that when he got to the monastery and he saw how peaceful the monks were living. It's like, I want that. He saw it and he had never seen that before. So he's like, I want that. The world does not want that for you. The world does not want you to be close to God. Jesus repeatedly tells his followers, you have to choose. You have to choose between me and the world. The world glorifies the idea of putting yourself first. There's all these liberation movements that get started. That you deserve better. You should be treated good. You should be treated like royalty. Well, if anyone should be treated like royalty or have that mindset, I mean, it's Jesus. And yet he comes down and he wants to be served. Or he wants to, sorry, I missed that. Sorry, Jesus. He wants to serve, not be served. Can't trust me with anything. So we have to separate from the world. St. Isaac the Syrian said, no one can draw near to God except he who separates himself from the world. I think a great example of this, Abuna Elijah for the longest time was like, you need to read The Silent Patriarch. You need to read The Silent Patriarch. And eventually I read The Silent Patriarch. And I was like, I should have read this a long time ago. But one of the things I remember in the book was when Pope Carlos was young, before he became a monk, he started going into his room and he spent like hours and hours and hours in his room. To the point where his family is like, what is wrong with this guy? This guy is crazy. And you know what he said when they confronted him about it? He asked them a question. He said, which is preferable? A holy life and real internal happiness, or the suffering and painful life one must endure in the secular world. The secular world that attacks our attention. They don't want you to be in control of your attention. Do any of you guys know B.F. Skinner? Operant conditioning? Ring a bell? Anybody? Oh, I like you. You like the only one. That's sad. B.F. Skinner was a psychologist. He had this idea called operant conditioning. And it was basically this idea that you can affect people's actions through punishment or reinforcement. If you want them to do something again, you give them positive reinforcement. So if I do a really good job on this talk, which I've already screwed up, Ivano gives me some cookies. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do it again. He doesn't want me to do it again. He's already like, what did I agree to? What have I done? This is what they do. This is how they control us. They're so smart about how they get our attention. And if they have our attention to that degree, where they can just, at the flick of a button, get you off of whatever you're doing, we can't really have a good relationship with God. Here's a way that they do this. Okay, think about your cell phones. Every time your cell phone buzzes, you look at your phone and maybe you get a notification. Maybe it's that person you like, you know, they might have liked your status. If you're lucky, they commented on it. You hear that ding. Now that ding becomes associated with a dopamine release. So every time you hear that ding, guess what? It takes over your life. Dang. It catches you off guard. It interrupts the normal pattern of how things are. That, to a lesser degree, that's what your phone does. It interrupts the normal pattern. This creates something in us that psychologists call mind wandering. If our minds are all over the place, if they're being attacked by these impressions, think about the John Cassian quote, being stamped by these impressions. You lose your character because anything that happens pulls you away. Mind wandering. Your mind is constantly bouncing from one thought to another. It's like you don't even have control over it. It's Six Flags in your head. T.S. Eliot said, if we really want to pray, we must first learn to listen. For in the silence of the heart, God speaks. We need stillness. We need quiet. We need solitude. You can be in solitude by yourself. You can bring that into the world. I'm not saying go be a monk. But if you learn to master stillness, you can spread that to everyone around you, and people are going to look at you. So yeah, that man has God because he's not affected by anything. Stillness is often being like a physical thing. But if you read Pope Shenouda's book on, I actually don't remember what it's on. I think it's called Stillness. Calmness. He says that there's stillness of the body, but there's also stillness of the mind. So I think you can think about these things in a similar way. But you can have a silent, quiet mind and be in a loud room. You know, you can be a rock in the middle of a storm. But you do that through being connected to Christ. So we have to control our thoughts. Psychologists, they use like the term top-down attention. In Paradise Lost, the poet John Milton, he said, man is sufficient to stand, though free to fall. We have everything we need. As long as we have the sword of Christ, we have everything we need. All these things get to us, but it's not impossible to overcome them. It's not impossible to overcome the distractions. Now, one of the traps that we might fall into in trying to control our attention is something like stoicism, you know, which can be beneficial in a way. But the problem with stoicism, and I'm sure some of you guys know what it is, I'll just kind of briefly explain it. The best way of describing it is like through like the claim that you don't control what happens to you, you control how you react to it. And it's all about basically numbing your mind, you know, not really indulging in emotions. It's like being a rock, you know. The problem with this, though, is that's not what Jesus was. Jesus didn't come down and just be like, yeah, whatever. Jesus was infinitely passionate and yet infinitely consistent. And the moment we allow ourselves to feel emotions deeply, it becomes really hard to be consistent. It's a very hard thing. But guess what? The Christian life ain't easy. That's the whole part of becoming a self. Like if you do what is easy, life will be hard. But if you do what is hard, life will be easy. We have to follow Christ in humiliation, not just exaltation. What I mean by that is it's really easy to follow the baby Jesus sitting in the manger, where everything's good. But the moment we have to go into the Garden of Gethsemane with him, what do? We fall asleep. The moment we're on the cross with him, we're like the other guy who's like, oh, if you're God, make this all go away, buddy. No, what we should be saying is, if you're God and you're suffering, that you endured all this for me, who am I to even be like, I shouldn't, I don't like this, The amount of passion that we can have with the consistency is what Christ is all about. It's not decreasing emotion, increasing consistency, or increasing emotion and not being consistent. It's that perfect middle balance. G.K. Chesterton said, because children have abounding vitality, because they are in spirit fierce and free, therefore they want things repeated and unchanged. They always say, do it again. And the grown-up person does it again until he is nearly dead. For grown-up people are not strong enough to exult in monotony. It is possible that God says every morning, do it again to the sun, and every evening, do it again to the moon. It may not be automatic necessity that makes all daisies alike. It may be that God makes every daisy separately, but he has never got tired of making them. It may be that he has the eternal appetite for infancy, for we have sinned and grown old, and our Father is younger than we. What a crazy sentence. Gosh, I'm going to just drop dead right now. Someone else is going to have to finish this. That is insane. Our Father has grown older, younger than we? That's crazy. What does that even mean? It means that we fail to realize just how beautiful the world is. And our attempts to deal with life's pressures, we forget to love. We forget to enjoy life. I have a friend who he took his son to Yosemite. Bad idea. Son's very young. Drive all the way up there. What do you want to do? You want to climb a mountain, right? Son's just playing in the grass. He doesn't get 5 feet out of the car. Playing in the grass. You know what? He was so happy. So happy. Could we all just be like that? Simple things. One speck of grass. It says we got to become like little children. Everything in this world today is so fast. You can drive from Santa Clarita to St. A in like 30 minutes. Hundreds of years ago, that would have been a journey. That would have been like a major life event. You would have wrote a book about that. If I wrote a book about my drive from Santa Clarita to St. A on a Sunday morning, someone please raise their hand and tell me they're going to read it. I'm just kidding. Don't, because you also need to go see a psychologist. We need to slow down. Matthew 18:3 says, assuredly, I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. It is not enough to just be consistent. It is not enough to just be stable. We have to be like little children. We have to love God's creation. We have to love God, and we have to love everybody around us because we love God. Saint Therese of Lisieux, Catholic saint, her simplicity, her humility is what we should strive to accomplish. She called herself a little flower. She said, I can't do this. God, lift me up. I'm a little flower. Who am I? I'm nobody. She was so simple that when she died at I think 24 years old, they went to the other nuns in the convent where she lived. And they said, tell us something about she wasn't a saint yet, but tell us something about Therese. And you know what they said? They said, you know what? she's literally so disappointing and boring and just she's such a like disappointment, utterly unremarkable, they say, that there's nothing we can say about her. That same unremarkable girl that died at 24 was canonized quicker than the normal period in the Catholic Church of when they canonize people. They cut that period shorter. Why is that? Because at that time, there was a popular heresy in the church. It was all about harder the holier. This is not as hard as we make it out to be. It's simple. We just have to be simple. We have to follow God. That's all we have to do. It's so simple. We don't even have to think about it. If you're living in the secular world, you're living without God. It's like, I got to do this. I got to do that. Just like God. Just let him drag you around by the scruff of your neck. We have to decrease so that he may increase. And when we do that, the love that emanates from a pure heart is a beautiful thing. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great novelist, which Andrew did not read the book that I recommended him, so sad about that. He said, to love someone means to see them as God intended them. We cannot properly love anyone apart from their relationship to God. Think about Augustine in the Confessions. He talks about his mom and his mom's love for him. And Augustine, who separates from God, he says his mom wept more when he separated from God than she would have if he would have physically died. Think about that. Think about loving someone in such a Christ-like way where you care more about their infinite life in heaven than their finite life on this earth. A pure heart is a bound heart. It must be bound to God to be eternally unchanging and infinitely passionate. The world sees love as being between one person and another. Christian love inserts a middle term. Only if we love a person in virtue of loving God can we love them with a true and perfect love. A pure heart is a heart bound to God, and only a heart bound to God can love truly. I know you guys are like falling asleep back here, so I'm just going to say one last thing. There's a prayer that I like a lot that I think kind of sums up a lot of these ideas. It's called the St. Francis prayer. I'm sure some of you guys have heard it. It wasn't written by Francis, but it was written in his honor. And Francis, the prayer of St. Francis goes like this. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Okay, you guys can go home and go to sleep now. Or come to our fundraiser. Also, I was really going to wear my UCLA Coptic Club hoodie today, and then I was like, nah, I don't want to piss them off any more than I am with this talk. So, yeah. The end. Ta-da.